black people are not seen as people. And that's the bottom line. And so this is actually a bigger problem than just police. This is a bigger problem than individual policemen. It's actually about the fact that the way that we think about one another is completely dehumanizing. And so I think that's why we're seeing this eruption of conversations, and that's why this conversation is particularly important, because Muslims like to say, racism is not in Islam. Of course racism is not in Islam. Allah is not racist, but we are racist. And there is racism amongst Muslim people. And if we're not talking about that, we should have been talking about this, years ago. This is a conversation that we've come to way too late. Black Muslims have been telling us again and again, repeatedly, there is racism and we face racism, and everybody wants to talk about Bilal and radiallahu anha and Malcolm X, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that we don't treat our black brothers and sisters with respect, that we even always, when the matter of black lives comes up, we want to talk about other oppression, and we suddenly care about everything else. We suddenly care about all the other causes in the world just for the sake of not having to talk about black people's lives. And so that's why this matters, and that's why George Floyd's death has caused such uproar, because it's not just about one man, it's about an entire population of people who are degraded by the police, by the government, by the media, and by all of us individuals. Even if we think we are anti-racist, we are benefiting from the fact that we are not black, and we are not facing death at the hands of the state police, right? So yes, of course we face racism. White supremacy means that there is a hierarchy of race where white people are at the top and black people are at the bottom. And we all know that. We know that in our daily lives. We know that in the way that people want fairer skin. We know that in the way that we see who runs our institutions. And we also know in the numbers of people that we see who's in prison, who's homeless, who's killed on the streets, who is supported by the Windrush scandal. Right? Black people are at the bottom and white people are at the top. And so we benefit by being not black, right? The darker your skin, the worse you are treated in society. And we know that from South Asia to the Middle East to the UK. This is a really good point, right? Because I think on the one hand, a lot of the racism that we see comes from the white supremacy in our society. So it comes from the way that white people treat black people. And so we know throughout the history of the US, for example, the reason the police even exist is to control and put black people back into slavery. If you look at the history of the police, that's where it comes from. And the reason they were able to do that was to create this idea that black people are criminals. So if we can create the idea of black people criminals, we can arrest them, we can put them back into prison, and in prison you're allowed to enforce slavery. But that is not the only source of this, right? So in South Asia, the system that is centuries old of casteism and the division of labor was racially coded. And you know this if you just walk down a single street in South Asia, right? You will see darker skinned people, people who are closer to black skins, doing the worst jobs, earning the least incomes, having the least access to education, to healthcare. That is what structural racism is, and that is rooted in our histories too, right? That's why people want fair skin, because it's this idea that the fairer my skin, the higher up in society I can go. And so this idea that black people are criminal, or, as we said, that Imam says, don't act black, that's not just rooted in white supremacy, it's also this history where blackness is associated with filth, with dirtiness, with something disgusting, with something nobody wants to touch, right? And so the actual correlation or the connection between untouchability, this caste issue that people want to pretend also Muslims don't have, right? Of course, Islam doesn't have caste, but Muslims from South Asia have often taken and internalized that caste system. And you will still see, when you even look at like Muslim matrimonial sites, people are talking about the caste of the people they want to marry, the skin color of the people they want to marry. This is a huge problem that you can't be in denial about. I mean, firstly, we need to empower ourselves with education, because this is factually incorrect, right? So 60% of knife-carrying convictions in the UK are of white people. They're not of black people. And yet black people are stopped 40 times more by the police, yeah? Okay, drug users in the UK, white people are almost two times more likely than black people to be drug users in the UK, but who do we associate with carrying drugs, with using drugs, with taking drugs? Right, so what we need to do actually is realize that all of these racist ideas that black people are more criminal, black people are more dangerous, they stem from the desire of the people who are the ruling class to control our society, to control poor people. And we're actually very, very uncritical if we play into that, because we're allowing the ruling class who already ruin our lives, right? As Muslims generally, we know that Islamophobia is not an enjoyable experience in the world. But if we're actually okay with an element of oppression, as long as it's not happening to us, then we're allowing a structure to exist where that oppression will eventually reach all of us. And we've seen that happen, right? So the police started off stopping and searching black people. They said it's a war on drugs. It wasn't. It was a war to arrest and put into prison black people. And now they're saying it's a war on terror. And now we care because as non-black people are affected by this, right? We know the war on terror really just means let's lock up Muslims, let's detain Muslims, let's deport Muslims. And so what we have to see is that connection, because if we actually want to live in a more fair and transformed society, that's what matters. And Khadija made, I think, a brilliant point earlier, which is racism is haram. And what's also haram is persecution, right? Wherever we see persecution, if you remember, what is the main message that Allah is saying again and again to the Prophet, especially when they're in Makkah, is that persecution is worse than killing. Yeah, the way that the Quraysh and these people are treating you is abhorrent. So we have to be against that. It's also the way that, I think a lot of Muslims, we only care about issues when they start to affect the wider Muslim community. So for example, actually Islamophobia is a great example of this, right? So now we're all really angry that the police are stopping and searching us at the border, right? Because it's happening to South Asian Muslims, it's happening to Arab Muslims, it's happening to Muslims of all different races and ethnicities. But stop and search, historically, has been happening to black Muslims for decades, right? So at the moment, if you're a black young person or a black person in London, you're 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a white person. Now, if we're not screaming and shouting about that, we don't actually care about stop and search. We actually just care about ourselves. We don't actually care about policing and racism. We just care about it not happening to us.